The high-level debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly continued on Friday, with world leaders addressing the pressing issues of the day. More abuses of the right to the asylum in the United States, with revelations of plans by the Biden administration to detain asylum seekers in the Guantanamo naval base. As part of the efforts to rebuild areas liberated from terrorists in Syria, reconstruction has begun on the Palestinian refugee camp of Al Yarmouk. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Now we begin with the news. The high-level general debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly continued on Friday, as heads of state and government will offer their annual addresses. On Friday, General Assembly members state will hold the fifth day of debate. We'll see a parallel event, the high-level dialogue on energy, that will bring together over 100 heads of state and government, as well as leaders from businesses, foundations, and international civil society, and also youth organizations to mobilize commitments and actions. On Thursday, leaders from low-lying and island nations requested rich countries at the United Nations General Assembly to act more forcefully against a warming planet. Also, Thursday saw the first ministerial meeting of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations, an initiative that was proposed by Venezuela and brings together several member states. The 76th General Debate addresses pressing issues affecting the international community, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccination rollout, and preparedness ahead of future health crises. Climate change and action to tackle it are also a key feature of the discussions. On addressing the United Nations General Assembly, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel condemned the escalating inequalities across the world and called for the strengthening of the international cooperation to address pressing issues.
We are living in uncertain times under the devastating impact of a pandemic which has sharpened the structural inequalities as well as global crisis. The role of multilateralism and of the United Nations are increasingly important, and international cooperation has been inadequate. The application of neoliberal formulas during decades has reduced the abilities of states to address the needs of their population. The most vulnerable have remained without protection, while the richest nations, the elites, and pharmaceutical transnationals are increasing their profits.
The Cuban president reiterated the United States' policy of unconventional warfare against Cuba as part of its bid to push for a regime change.
It's in this context that they are launching against our country a non-conventional war where the U.S. government has dedicated publicly millions of dollars through campaigns of lies and manipulation, which use new information technologies and other digital platforms to project inside and outside the country a totally false image of the Cuban reality, sowing confusion, aiming to destabilize, to discredit the country, and to justify the regime change doctrine. It's in this
Addressing the United Nations General Assembly as part of the high-level general debate, President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, stressed that the worst health crisis of the century has changed our reality forever.
The COVID-19 pandemic has forever changed the nature of multilateral engagement, of diplomacy, of business, and of basic human interaction. And yet, even as we are separated by the expanses of geography and distance, the noble ideals of fellowship, solidarity, and cooperation stand firm. They are the bedrock on which the United Nations was formed 76 years ago, and they have been our guide as we confront the worst global health emergency in over a century.
Addressing the United Nations General Assembly during the third day of the high-level general debate, President of Angola, João Lourenço, stressed the importance of solidarity in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is therefore urgent that we establish, in practical terms, a general understanding that solidarity and streamlined procedures to access vaccines are the only way to lead the world to victory in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, with the broadest possible immunization of the inhabitants of our planet.
The Angolan head of state also referred to the unequal rates of vaccination around the world, and especially in Africa.
It is shocking to see the disparity between some nations and others with respect to availability of vaccines. These disparities allow for third doses to be given in some cases, while in other cases, as in Africa, the vast majority of the population has not even received the first dose.
In the framework of the 76th UN General Assembly, the President of Burkina Faso, Rochemar Christian Kabore, thanked friendly nations for their support in the fight against the pandemic.
At the national level, Burkina Faso has adopted a response plan to organize the public health response and has drawn up social measures and an economic recovery plan. Thanks to COVAX and thanks to our friendly governments and countries, we've received vaccines and our vaccination program is underway.
Meanwhile, the President of Botswana, Mawatisi Mazizi, called for respect to the United Nations Charter and to ensure equal access to vaccines for all peoples.
Now it is time for world leaders, guided by the ideals of the United Nations Charter, to ensure that this life-saving resource is distributed equitably. Without a doubt, a worldwide vaccination campaign that ensures that all countries, especially the developing countries, have urgent access if we are to contain the continuing spread of this deadly virus and its more transmissible variants.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. Plans to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic crisis and climate change, as well as criticism of the Organization of American States, mark Bolivian President Luis Arce's speech at the UN General Assembly in New York on Thursday.
Unfortunately, in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, the states and governments do not have organizations that are focused on the fight for life. Quite to the contrary, organizations such as the Organization of American States, OAS, divide us, promote coups d'etats, and generate instability. We reject any unilateral measure aimed at preventing our countries from exercising their right to determine freely their political, economic, and social systems. A clear demonstration of the application of unilateral measures is the inhumane and criminal commercial and financial blockade against Cuba, which puts at risk the lives of more than 11 million citizens of this country in the midst of a pandemic.
In his speech at the high-level general debate of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, the President of the Presidency Council of the Government of National Unity of the State of Libya, Mohamed Menfi, referred to the scheduled general elections to be held on December 24th.
Call focuses on the meeting of the stakeholders represented by leaders of relevant political and military institutions to facilitate reaching an agreement on effective guarantees to maintain the political process and conducting safe, transparent, fair elections with results acceptable to all.
The Libyan representative also called on the international community to combat all forms of terrorism and to disassociate it from any religion.
all its forms and manifestations, irrespective of its sources, motives, or justifications. We have always stressed that terrorism is an international phenomenon and should not be linked to any religion or belief. We have suffered one of the most ferocious and barbarous forms of terrorism all over Libya.
As part of the first week of sessions of the United Nations General Assembly, 18 member states held the first ministerial meeting of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter, an initiative promoted by Venezuela. As well as analyzing the ongoing challenges and threats to the UN Charter, the group reflected on issues of common interest, ratified the commitment to the validity of the multilateralism, and also reiterated condemnation of unilateral coercive measures. The group highlighted that it is essential to achieve a more peaceful, prosperous, just, and equitable world, as well as a system based on the rules established in the universal and legally binding instrument that is the UN Charter, which constitutes an achievement for humanity.
We vow to spare no effort in preserving, promoting and defending the prevalence and validity of the Charter of the United Nations, which, in the current international juncture, has a renewed and even more important value and relevance. We express our serious concern at the growing resort to unilateralism, in detriment not only of multilateralism, but also of international cooperation and solidarity, which must be deepened now more than ever, including in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic.
An activist belonging to Brazil's homeless workers movement demonstrated outside the headquarters of the Sao Paulo Stock Exchange on Thursday and briefly occupied the building to protest inequality in Brazil amid runaway inflation as the country struggles to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. Activists stress that the Sao Paulo Stock Exchange, the main exchange of Latin America, is the biggest symbol of speculation and social inequality in the country. They mobilized to condemn the increased cost of living, lack of access to basic goods, and hunger caused by the economic policy of the administration of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Consumer prices have been rising close to the 10% mark over the past year, and basic items such as food and electricity are set to get even more expensive. The protest also served to denounce record bank profits, the rise in large fortunes, and the emergence of 42 new billionaires in a country where food insecurity affects more than 116 million people. China on Thursday said it opposed Taiwan joining a major trans-Pacific trade deal, once again reiterating that the region is a part of China.
There is only one China. The Taiwan region is an inalienable part of China. The One China principle is a widely recognized principle of international relations and a consensus widely followed by the international community.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The Biden administration seems to be recycling inefficient and inhumane policies from former governments, with revelations of plans to detain asylum seekers in the Guantanamo naval base. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is advertising a new contract to operate a migrant detention facility at the U.S. naval base on the illegally occupied Cuban territory of Guantanamo Bay. According to government records, applicants for guards must be fluent in Spanish or Haitian Creole. The holding facility on the base has a capacity of 120 people, and the U.S. officials estimate it will hold an average of 20 people daily. However, the contract solicitation says the service provider will be responsible for erecting temporary housing facilities for populations that exceed 120 and up to 400 people in a surge event. Former President Donald Trump had raised the idea of using the base, infamously known today for torture and arbitrary detentions, for deportations. But it's not a new idea. During the George H.W. Bush administration from 1991 to 1993, when many Haitians sought to flee the country to seek asylum in Florida, as many as 12,000 were sent to the Guantanamo Bay. While the Biden administration deports hundreds of Haitian asylum seekers from the United States, authorities in Texas have deployed vehicles along the border in Del Rio to form a physical barrier. Republican Governor Greg Abbott sent a float at the Border Patrol cars to the area to prevent people from crossing the river as part of what he called a wall of steel, after having criticized the Biden administration for allowing the situation to get out of control. These statements came soon after shocking images of Texas agents on horseback charging at Haitian asylum seekers sparked international condemnation. Beyond the rhetoric and such repressive moves, the human rights of tens of thousands of people in a desperate situation are being trampled on, while the right to asylum doesn't appear to exist in the United States. The United States Special Envoy for Haiti announced his resignation, citing the inhumane U.S. decision to deport thousands of Haitians from the U.S. border. Daniel Furi's resignation comes as the Biden administration faces a backlash over the mistreatment of Haitian asylum seekers in the state of Texas. The former U.S. official stated that he will not be associated with the inhumane and counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees, adding that the U.S. policy approach to Haiti remains deeply flawed. Furi stated in his resignation letter that Haiti is wrecked with poverty, crime, government corruption, and a lack of humanitarian resources, stressing that the collapsed state is unable to provide security or basic services, and more refugees will fuel further desperation and crime. And we remain on topic. Hundreds of Haitian citizens forcibly deported from the United States were detained as soon as they landed at the Port-au-Prince International Airport. Tensions began when authorities informed the deportees that the Haitian government had signed off their return to Haiti. Several tried to reboard the plane, stressing that there is nothing for them in their homeland. The U.S. policy of deportation ignores the fact that many of those being sent to Haiti fled the country years ago, seeking a better life. Some even have refugee status in other nations, such as Chile and Brazil, but faced with increasingly difficult living conditions amid the economic crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. They decided to make the dangerous journey to try to reach the United States. Filippo Grandi, director of the United Nations Refugee Agency, said that the deportations authorized by the Biden administration amid the volatile situation in Haiti could be considered a violation of international law. And reconstruction work continues in the Palestinian refugee camp of Al-Yarmouk in Syria, located south of Damascus, following its liberation from terrorist groups in October 2018. These joint efforts between social sectors and the government are of great symbolic value for Palestinians in the diaspora. Our correspondent, Hisham Wanus, has the details.
The Civilian Development Association, ATHAR, or IMPACT, launched the Together We Can initiative, whose purpose is to remove the debris left in the wake of the terrorist destruction of the Al-Yarmouk camp, in order to facilitate the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the area, and thus contribute to the return of its inhabitants.
We have developed many initiatives to help the victims of the war, and today we are launching this initiative in this camp in order to guarantee the safe return of the inhabitants to their homes, and we will do so with the support of the authorities and the camp's own residents. We work as volunteers in the framework of cooperation between our association and governmental institutions to help people return to normality, whether in Al-Yarmouk camp or in other areas of return.
The report on the damage done by the terrorist groups reveals that 20% of the buildings are totally destroyed, 40% require partial repair, and the remaining 40% are suitable for rehabilitation. Many Palestinian families that were forcibly displaced by the extremists have returned, determined to rebuild the area, which, since its construction in 1957, has become a platform of struggle for the recovery of occupied Palestine and a symbol of adherence to the right of return to their homeland of all the Palestinian refugees. We dream of returning to our homeland from this site, which is still the place that has sheltered us for many years, and we hope that international humanitarian organizations will help us to rebuild and rehabilitate this camp of great symbolic value to us.
We don't live in Palestine, however, here we have everything we need, and here all our rights we are guaranteed until the terrorists came and expelled us from our homes. But now we have returned and we are confident that we will get our life back on track, and we are full of faith that we will return to our beloved Palestinian homeland.
This camp is of great value to me because I was born and raised here, and I have all my memories here. And that is why I have returned to rebuild my house in this place as a starting point for my longed-for return to Palestine, my homeland. Palestinians sheltered in Syria live in the same conditions as Syrians in 12 camps spread throughout the country. Al-Yarmouk, the largest camp, is considered the capital of the Palestinian diaspora and the cradle of Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation, which is why it was one of the main targets of attacks by extremist groups since the beginning of the terrorist war against Syria in 2011, in order to fulfill the failed plan of the Israeli occupation to displace, for the second time, its Palestinian inhabitants to the edge of the world, so as to eliminate their just cause and their legitimate right of return.
TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
We thank you, Hicham, for this information, and we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.